You are listening to Eat Meat Sparingly, a Word of Wisdom podcast. I am your host, Ali Essig. Today, I'm going to talk about something that some consider a little political, but I don't think it's political at all. It's just simply facts when it comes to factory farming and the environment. And you can just simply look at what the science says and the facts. And when we look at it as we're just a victim to the circumstance, then there's nothing we can do about it. But when you understand the facts and can really, instead of just turn a blind eye, like, this isn't actually happening. No, the environment's doing just fine. Instead of turning a blind eye to it, but really opening yourself and educating yourself about what's going on, you can make a difference. If there's anything else that I want you to take from this podcast is your food choices matter. You can make a difference. You can improve the health of Mother Earth. And why not? When you know better, you do better. And so for that reason, that is why today I want to talk about factory farming and the environment. Now, factory farming is basically when large numbers of livestock are raised indoors in conditions intended to maximize production at minimal cost. Okay, so this is not about your next door neighbor who's a farmer who has this cute little farm in their backyard. No, these are farms often called concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs. So how much do we actually eat from a factory? How much does this really affect the average person? And I think when you understand it, it's fascinating. Cows are the least amount. If you've driven across America, you've probably seen happy cows. I always call them happy. Hey, look at happy cows. Look, those are happy cows. The ones that are outside, they're grazing. And so in general, we're only consuming about 70.4% of cows that are factory farmed. So most are. In fact, before we went plant-based, I would say like 100% of the meat that we were eating was factory farmed because the grass-fed versions usually tend to be more expensive. Pigs, it is 98.3% of pigs come from factory farms. Turkeys, so on your Thanksgiving Day turkey, unless you go to a specialty farm, it is 99.8% are from factory farms. Egg-laying hens, it's 98.2%. So unless you're buying it from a friend who has eggs in their backyards or hens in their backyards that are laying eggs, it's most likely coming from a factory farm from a bird that was never able to even raise its wings, right? To spread its wings because they're stuck in these battery cages. When it comes to chickens, it is 99.9 plus %. Like it's pretty much 100%. Again, unless you're buying from some local person who kills them themselves and does all that. But I think when we were not plant-based, we ate chicken so much. And the thought of how painful and terrible these chickens' lives are, it's really sad. It really is sad when you look into it. And then fish is 50%. And today I'm not going to talk much about fish. That's going to be a whole other topic for a whole other podcast. Now, I'm also not going to go into detail of the suffering of these animals. I really just want to talk specifically about the environment and the impact of the environment from factory farming. And so what is the impact of meat production on the atmosphere and the waterways? That's what we're going to talk about today. Well, because the demand for meat is straining the planet's ability to produce it, meat production has increased more than 600% since 1950. So this is why it's straining the planet's ability to produce it. It's because since 1950, the demand for we're eating, we think that it's normal. We look around and we think it's totally normal to always pick your protein for your lunch. Oh, I'll have chicken or I'll have fish or I'll have steak. Like have that for dinner too. We view that as normal, but this is not normal. This was not normal in our history of the world. Right now, even just compared to the 1950s, this is not normal. The demand for meat production has increased by 600%. But also keeping in mind that we have increased significantly in population. And so not only are we eating more meat, but we have a huge population. However, the demand for meat is increasing even further than just our population alone. Modern food production poses an existential threat to the environment. It is neither a sustainable way to feed our growing global population nor a path towards long-term survival for our species. The demand for certain types of meat are taxing the limits of the Earth's ability to produce them. Like we are just pushing our limits. And factory farming plays a significant role on climate change. And if you want to choose to turn a blind eye, that's your choice. but this is not a political thing. This is really truly what is happening. And how does this? Why do we make these claims? Kind of prove it type of a thing. Well, let's look at the details when it comes to meat production and factory farming and how it impacts. And industrial livestock agriculture, raising and feeding cows, pigs, and chickens, it generates as much greenhouse gas emissions as all cars, trucks, and automobiles combined, accounting for the greenhouse gases involved in clearing land to graze livestock and grow feed, deforestation, keeping livestock alive, which is the nitrous oxide from increased use of fertilizer, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and even processing and transporting to all of these end products. It is estimated that the overall contribution by livestock to greenhouse gas emissions is 51%. And that's actually a low estimation. That is a low, some people estimate it's even higher, but in general, most people agree that it's at 51%. The best opportunities for reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the food system is to look at factory farming. Like, it is necessary to shift patterns away from diets rich in greenhouse gas intensive meat and dairy foods. Okay. So greenhouse gases are released from factory farming. And let's talk about each one. So we have methane. So each year, a single cow will belch or fart about 220 pounds of methane. So methane from cattle is shorter lived than carbon dioxide, but 28 times more potent in warming the atmosphere. Manure also acts as a source of methane released in our environment. And in general terms, methane emissions are higher when manure is stored and treated in these liquid systems called lagoons or ponds, which is how manure is stored in factory farms. So it's so much higher because they take all this waste and they just put it in a big pool. It's disgusting, right? And while dry manure, right, or more solid systems tend to have less methane emissions. So it's going to be so much better if, again, it's your local farm who's just doing everything from his backyard. Like, that's more of a closed loop system. It's going to be so much better for the environment than these factory farms. Now, carbon dioxide, animal, livestock, and feed take up a significant amount of space, which is the driver of deforestation. It is also responsible for approximately 60% of direct global greenhouse gas emissions. And agribusiness, in which huge areas of forest are burned or cleared to make space for crops and livestock, is the #1 driver of deforestation worldwide. Some 80% of global deforestation is a result of agriculture production. And just to give you an idea, beef production specifically is the biggest driver for deforestation in the Amazon. Between August 2018 and July 2019 alone, the Amazon lost over 3,800 square miles, which is equivalent to over 1.8 million football fields for expansions of pasture for beef production. That poor Amazon rainforest. We're just tearing it down so that we can expand pastures for beef. And once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? Greenhouse gases released from factory farming there's a lot. Nitrous oxide is one that you'll hear over and over and over again. Nitrous oxide is mainly generated during manure ammonia decomposition. Manure is used to fertilize organic crops, yet synthetic nitrogen fertilizer is often used for everything else. So usually we use regular manure, right, if it's organic, but we're going to use synthetic versions if it's not. And here's why. Because I was like, why are we doing that? With factory farms, there is so much manure. It's ridiculous. Like, we have more manure than we could even use, right? And so why are we producing synthetic nitrogen fertilizer when we have a ton of manure? Well, first of all, these big lagoons of manure are mostly water and they're stinky. There's a lot of disease that is carried with it. And so transporting that is very difficult and very expensive. And while it would be ideal if all the crops were raised by the animals, by the factory farms, that's one thing. But most crops are grown thousands of miles away. And so you would have to transfer that manure thousands of miles. And so organic crops, yes, they do that. They make sure to get manure. But for the most part, it's cheaper. It's easier to use synthetic nitrogen fertilizer because it's cheaper to produce. It's easier to transport to different locations. And so that's why we use it. Now, the problem is though, synthetic nitrogen fertilizer destroys the carbon and nitrogen storage of the soil, really. So it makes it very difficult for cycling capacity of soil. It ruins the soil slowly over time. It's terrible for our soil. Like manure is great for our soil, but the synthetic version is a great short-term solution, not a great long-term solution for our soil, really. And these crops are subjected to heavy fertilizer and our soil is slowly being depleted, which is why the tomatoes, as we talk about, you see this all the time, our vegetables, we don't have as much nutrition in our vegetables anymore. Take tomatoes, for example, in the 1950s, they had this many nutrients and now they don't. And you know why? It's because we're eating so much meat. It's because we're eating so much meat and we have to feed the meat. And so we're doing all these things to raise a ton of crops so that we could feed the meat, and it's depleting our soil. That's why. So we really have to look not just at the smoke, but what's the fire? What's the fire here? And why is it that our food is being depleted of the nutrients that it once had? Nitrous oxide also has 300 times more heat trapping power than carbon dioxide. And it also depletes the stratospheric ozone layer and stays in the atmosphere for about 114 years. 114 years. So it really is sad what's going on, and what's going on because of the synthetic fertilizer that we're using, just because it's cheaper, it's easier. And basically nitric oxide emissions are increasing at a faster rate than any other type of greenhouse gas emission. Wow. Wow. It doesn't end with that, right? There's a lot that we could go into with animal welfare, and I'm not going to go into it today on how animals are raised in the factory farms where chickens and pigs, like the terrible, terrible conditions that these animals are going through. It's really sad. They are not able to fulfill the measure of their creation. I even think of pigs that sows are stuck in these gestation crates for about 4 months and they cannot even turn around. They cannot even turn around. It is so sad. And even what dairy cows go through, right? And just to maximize the milk consumption and how they're separated from the mother cows, and how you can hear that the lamenting sounds of the mother cows when they're separated, that they truly love their children. And anyway, again, there's a lot of information when it comes to just what's going on the inside of these factory farms, as well as how these animals are slaughtered and all of that, and the humans that are working in these factory farms, like the human welfare that's going on. But I want to talk more about just what can we do? What can we do to improve the environment? What can we do when it comes to making a difference? And one of the simplest things is we can make a huge difference on our water impact by choosing more fruits and vegetables and less animal products. So the overall water footprint per ton produced on beef is 4 million gallons. And that's huge, huge. Where when it comes to vegetables, it's going to be closer to about 85,000 gallons. And so nearly 1/3 of the total water footprint of agriculture in the world is related to the production of animal products. The water footprint of any animal product is larger than the water footprint of crop products with equivalent nutritional value. With equivalent nutritional value, we do not need animal products to survive. We do not need animal products to grow muscles. We do not need animal products to thrive as a species. In fact, we thrive better without them. And unfortunately, it takes a lot of water to grow crops that then feed the animals. And then it's a lot of water to feed the animals themselves. Also, animal products from industrial factory farming systems generally consume and pollute more ground and surface water resources than animal farming from grazing or even mixed systems. So again, I just want to highlight this is because of factory farming. It's not like your local neighbor who has their own backyard farm. This is because we have this increased demand for chicken. Again, 99.9+% of chickens come from a factory farm, 70% of cows. This is most of the meat that we are eating. And again, I want to really clarify that the demand is raising higher than just the population. It's not like, okay, well, duh, that makes sense because there's more population today than there was in the 1950s. No, it's skyrocketed. Global water demand for fresh water is estimated to increase by 20 to 30% by 2050. A large part of that is because of our increasing demand for meat. Global water demand for agriculture will increase by 60% by 2025. And because global demand for fresh water is outpacing human population growth, we are now using so much water that we can't just use the water that melts off the snow and the glaciers in the summer that runs into our streams. In order to keep up with the current demand, we have to drill deep into the aquifers to essentially mine water out of the ground. And future generations will not have access to any water in these aquifers because of our current increasing demand for fresh water. And this is happening worldwide. And just to understand, it took thousands and thousands of years for the water to even accumulate in these aquifers that we're just taking out so quickly and so fast. So if there's anything you take away, from this podcast episode, I want it to be this: you do not have to be a perfect vegan. If all you do is cut out 50% of the animal products in your diet, that's all you do, and replace them with legumes, nuts, more potatoes. That could be, instead of cooking a whole pound of ground beef, maybe cook half of a pound of ground beef and then add 2 cans of beans to it, right? That you do not have to take it out completely. But if you do that, if you can cut out 50% of the animal products that you're consuming, it will result in a 30% reduction in your individual food-related water footprint. A 30% reduction, that is huge. That's a big difference that you can make by just choosing different protein. But if you do decide to go completely vegan, right? Going completely vegan reduces your water footprint by almost 60%. 60%. It is huge. Now, when we talk about water, I can't glance over the nutrient pollution that is going on in our water system. Nutrient pollution is the leading source of pollution for our streams in the United States, and it is because of increased use of this fertilizer that we've talked about, right? The fertilizer for crops used to feed farm animals. It exposes our water supply to increasing amounts of chemicals and nitrogen. So again, in a traditional nitrogen balanced system, you have a farm, right? And you have a farm, it's just this like cute little backyard farm that what was happening 200 years ago, right? Where you would produce crops for grain for livestock, grain for humans would consume it. And we'd also consume some of the animals, but then we would also take the manure and turn it back into our fields. And then that would fertilize our fields. It's a beautiful closed loop. Unfortunately, that's not what's happening in our modern food and our modern farm and food nitrogen balance system. So right now, like, we have fertilizers that are produced in factories, right? Fossil carbon energy powered. And then that is used to harvest crops. But unfortunately, about 20% of that just in this process is leached into our water. Okay. And then another 5% is exported from the US. Another 5% goes to human consumption of the crops that we are actually eating. And then 32% goes towards the crops that animals are eating. And then in that process, another 17% is leached to water. Okay. So again, you see that there's just these little gaps. It's like holes in this bucket in this system that's going into our waterways. And unfortunately, that is where we see a lot of damage being done. Now, how does that work? Well, there's this phosphorus runoff. So again, mostly synthetic nitrogen fertilizer causes this nutrient pollution, but the phosphorus runoff from farms contribute as well. Mostly these CAFOs, because remember, these big lagoons of manure, these huge, disgusting, smelly lagoons of manure. Okay, they're just hanging out. And usually these factory farms produce more waste than can actually be used in the local farm systems. And it's too expensive to transport it to other systems further away. And so in the process, it's also stored in these untreated, gigantic anaerobic waste storage structures or pits for up to 6 months. Imagine a big, huge pool of manure that it's stored for 6 months. That's why it smells so bad when you drive past a factory farm. You know when you drive past one, it's disgusting. And it's destroying the local system because after storage, It is spread on farm fields for disposal, but this is where the CAFO waste often enters surface water and can act like fertilizer for algae, creating these large and extensive algae blooms, which I'm going to explain a little bit more why this matters. Why does it matter that this fertilizer is fertilizing algae in our water, in our rivers, right? That then goes into our ocean. Well, these synthetic fertilizers and the CAFO waste. So both of them, there's runoff from synthetic fertilizers like we talked about, and there's runoff from these factory farms, big lagoons. And both are stimulating this rapid growth of phytoplankton, or this algae or plankton blooms. And the phytoplankton, they grow up in high abundance, which then indirectly use up all of the oxygen in the water, making it impossible for other organisms to breathe. This is why it matters. In fact, the EPA reports that more than half of all US rivers are now unsuitable for aquatic life, largely due to nutrient pollution from industrial agriculture practices. And on top of that, it's not just the rivers. These algae blooms they're washed off. So let's go back to these crops that are fertilized with synthetic or even the CAFOs, the waste, right? The fertilizer that washes off vast cornfields and this organic nitrogen and phosphorus leaching from CAFO manure ponds eventually drain into the Gulf of Mexico. The agriculture and urban nutrient pollution sources in the Mississippi watershed fuels the Gulf of Mexico, which is now called the Gulf Hypoxic Dead Zone. So what causes the dead zone? Heavy rains and melting snow washes massive amounts of nutrient pollution, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus, from fertilizer and animal sewage. And there are a lot of scientists that think that nutrient pollution is actually more devastating to the Gulf system than the BP oil spill. I don't know if you remember the BP oil spill. I don't know how old you were when that happened. It was like a big deal back in the media. There was this big, huge oil spill. And we're like, oh my gosh, there was so much media around it, so much attention around it. But this dead zone that's causing even more devastation to the ocean, to that area, to the Gulf of Mexico, gets no media, no coverage. I wish we all knew this, then we can make better choices. I wish we knew the impact of our choices more than we currently do. And sadly, because of how much we're consuming and our current systems, there really is no end in sight to nutrient pollution. And it's just getting worse and worse over time. So that is what's going on, right? That is what's going on currently when it comes to the environment. And yes, we can get political about it, but I don't think this is a political issue unless you want to make meat political. But in general, if we consume less meat, our environment will be better off for it. If we can just consume more plant-based proteins, if we can consume more foods that require less of an impact to our environment, it makes a difference. And again, you can make a difference. Like, it's one thing to learn this and feel like, oh, I feel powerless. Like when it comes to global warming, I feel so powerless if I learned anything about it. I don't even want to. It's like I almost want to turn a blind eye because I'm like, I can do nothing. But in this situation, you can do something. You have the power to make a choice that matters. Even just cutting the amount of meat that you're eating it more sparingly, will significantly reduce your water footprint. It's a small change that you can make that makes a big impact. And I didn't even mention the amount of animal welfare, the pain and suffering, all that's going on in the factory farms that you can make an impact on. So it's not just the environment, but it's also on the animals. It's also on the humans that are working in these conditions. But it's time as a society that we know, that we educate ourselves on what really is going on and stop turning a blind eye towards it. If we care about other people, if we care about giving service to others and helping and ministering and doing all of these things, we want to make an impact for good, then we should also care about Mother Nature, who's constantly serving us, who's constantly doing everything for us. And we can make an impact for good on future generations if we just simply choose to eat meat more sparingly. All right, guys, I'm super excited for next week's episode. I'm actually speaking at Restore next week, and I've already recorded my episode, and I'm going to go a little bit deeper into my topic that I will be speaking, and it will air after I speak next Saturday. But if you don't already have your tickets, make sure to use the code PLANTWHYS, PLANTWHYS, to grab your ticket to Restore at UVU September 26th through the 27th, as I talk about the deeper wisdom behind the word of wisdom. All right, I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to Eat Meat Sparingly, a Word of Wisdom podcast. I'm your host, Ali Essig. And if you need more help and support with transitioning to eating more plants so you can lose weight and improve your gut health and just reduce your risk of chronic disease, then make sure to check out my PlantWhys membership. That's PLANTWHYS, because I like to teach the why behind eating more plants. But if all you need is just a couple more delicious recipes that feed your family and everyone loves, and not to mention super simple and easy, then make sure to check out my YouTube channel, which is also PlantWhys, PLANTWHYS. Hope to see you there.